But give us a sense, because you've been in one of these presidential campaigns in that last week. What are these two campaigns focused on right now?
Well, David, this last week is really about all hands on deck. This is really the opportunity that both campaigns have to mobilize their base of support, as well as to make sure that they are conveying whatever their closing message is. And it's pretty clear the Trump campaign has their closing message. They're attacking Joe Biden as a career politician who's never gotten anything done. And the Biden folks are coming right back at the Trump campaign, assailing the president for his handling of COVID and then the economic downturn afterwards. So both campaigns really are out there with a singular message, ideally, as well as reaching out to those voters who they know will support their candidate and making sure that they get out and actually vote. That is a very important thing as we go into the close here.
So, Lanhee, 2020 is different from any other year in so many different ways, between a pandemic and what's happening in the economy. So many things have gone on. Typically, when you have an incumbent, as we do now in President Trump, it's a referendum on the incumbent and the incumbent's record. Are we talking about that at all at this point? I mean, we've thought that President Trump would be running on the economy.
Yeah. Well, certainly the Biden campaign, they want it to be a referendum on Trump's handling of COVID. That is very clear from their campaign messaging, from what you saw from Vice President Biden in the debate last week, from everything that they're telling the American people through their campaign advertising, digital, TV, et cetera. They want this to be a referendum on Trump and how Trump has done. The president, for his part, would like to talk forward-looking about the economy, what his plans are, how he plans to recover from COVID. In that sense, it is a fairly typical incumbent reelection campaign, in the sense that you've got one side really trying to make it a referendum, and clearly the Biden team believes that they are at a point of strength when they are talking about the Trump record, particularly, as I noted, on COVID.
So Lanhee, as we go into this election, there are so many things that are in question. The polls seem to indicate fairly stubbornly, if I can say that the former vice president has a lead, not just nationally, but even in some battleground states, although it's narrower than the national number. But I've also seen some reports, like Pew has got a report out, that the percentage of Trump voters who are really enthusiastic is higher than the percentage of Biden voters. Biden seems to be gaining, but is there an enthusiasm gap here between these two candidates?
Well, I think that, David, is the biggest source of concern for the Biden campaign, which is, you know, at the end of the day, we talked about mobilization. Mobilization is driven by enthusiasm. And at this point, it does seem like the enthusiasm for Trump affirmatively from his supporters is greater than the affirmative enthusiasm from Biden. The thing we don't know is how strong the motivation is to vote against Trump. You hear this often from Biden supporters that, look, I may not be that excited about Joe Biden, but I'm certainly excited about voting against Donald Trump. And so this year it's going to be interesting. We're going to look at the intensity of support for Trump and in some ways the intensity of opposition to Trump to help gauge how successful Biden's going to be. It's not a traditional situation where you look at intensity of support for both candidates, because it's pretty clear on that measure Vice President Biden is not doing as well as President Trump is.
Lanhee, jump forward, if you can, to January and play out the alternative scenarios of a second term of President Trump versus a first term of President Biden, specifically on policy. That is what you did for Governor Romney when he ran for president. And I mean not just what the differences are in the policy, but what can get done. What do you think the biggest point of differences in what actually might get done?
Well, I think the biggest question is going to be what happens with control of the Congress, and in particular control of the Senate. I think it's quite clear that the Democrats will hold on to the House. I think the big question is, can Republicans hold the Senate? If Republicans hold the Senate, then it's going to make a big difference in terms of what Vice President Biden can do. But also, frankly, he's going to be constrained, right? He can't go as far to the left as some of his progressive base might want him to go. In some ways, I've argued that might actually be good for Biden. It might actually be good to have the Republican Senate as a foil to say, look, we can't get rid of the filibuster. We can't pack the Supreme Court. We can't go to single-payer health care. We can't do some of the things the progressive left wants to do. So in that sense, for Biden, there is potentially an advantage in having a Republican Senate. Now, for Trump, really, I think if Trump wins, he is going to have a Republican Senate, because his coattails are going to carry across some of those senators who are more vulnerable. And then I think it's going to be more business as usual, with one possible exception, which is I do think the president is going to be looking at legacy. And that is something that could be a very powerful motivator for him to work with Democrats. I think we could see a much larger stimulus or recovery package, for example, straight out of the gate. action maybe on prescription drug pricing and surprise medical billing. There are certain areas where I do see the president maybe trying to work together with Democrats if he's reelected and even if he's got a majority in the Senate.
And finally, Lanhee, what about infrastructure? Is that possibly a place in which these two candidates actually converge rather than diverge? Or is this really a chimera? Is this really sort of that silver chalice that we can never quite find?
Well, right. I mean, I think it's one of those policy areas where you would expect there to be more agreement. You would have expected something to have gotten done already. I put this into the category of if Trump gets reelected and he's looking to get something done where there is potentially bipartisan support, this could be an area he goes to. In the same way for Vice President Biden, if he gets elected and he's looking to work with the Republican Senate, this is an area potentially where you might find agreement. So I think a lot of this does come down, David. I've been emphasizing to the constituencies I've spoken to, yes, we love to pay attention to the presidential election. Really look at the Senate. Mm-hmm. That is where the rubber's going to hit the road in terms of policy making and what the bounds of the possible and impossible look like.